Hello, everyone. Welcome to Centering Justice. My name is Hamida Bagarathi, and I'm one of your co-hosts, co-holders, co-collaborators for today, pronoun she, her, hers. And I join you today from Ypsilanti, from my apartment, on the unceded and occupied lands of the Anishinaabeg, the Odawa, the Potawatomi, who compose the three council fires of Michigan, and the Sauk and the Fox and the Wyandot, and land in which contemporary Indigenous peoples continue to live and thrive and contribute to a thriving society and improving our thriving society. I think particularly for today, as we talk about healing spaces, I want us to hold the complexities of the ways in which that we ourselves occupy land, knowing that there are pasts, there are presents, there are futures in the ways in which we connect to space. And especially for BIPOC folks in histories, there can be additional complexities. So hoping that you hold that as we move forward through today to think about healing. To give a little recap of Centering Justice, you might be new here, you might be a frequent flyer, CJ, we welcome all of you. So this is really a space that we invite visionaries, storytellers, doers, and healers who are interrupting the status quo, who are BIPOC or Black, Indigenous people of color, to really inspire us to believe in, act in, think about, get some modeling in of how we can create a more just and thriving societies on multiple levels of ourselves, with folks in our communities, folks, our beloved people, and in our organizations. And we're really, really excited to give a very warm, during this somewhat snowy day, welcome to Susan Matous, who is, I don't know, I feel like she's the Czarina of a lot of what Idlewild holds. She's a lovely ambassador to Idlewild. And Susan is an educator and project coordinator from Detroit, living in Idlewild. Susan made the big shift to call Idlewild her home recently. She's been part of the Idlewild community, though, for over 15 years and really passionate about contributing to the community's revival projects. Susan's a business owner, a volunteer, and really uses her talents and connections with people to build community. So really, really so excited to have Susan with us today. To give a little more framing, or to give a small, soft reminder as to why we are gathered here today. Spaces and places can contribute to our healing, and they can be especially powerful when they center our histories, create a way for us to see ourselves in those places and spaces, present experience, and dreams for the future. So what can we learn from places that BIPOC communities use for their healing? How can we create spaces that immerse us in moments of rest, joy, and celebration? And at this moment, I invite everyone in the audience to drop in the chat, and I will add this question to the chat as well. Where are the spaces that offer you rest and respite? It can be a location, it can be some of the qualities of the spaces, but we wanna hear from you, kind of get a sense of where do you find that soft landing spot? Speaking of soft landing spots, I'm gonna mosey on over to Yodit, sort of one of my co-holders of the space. Also shout out to Carly Frederick, who is another co-holder of the space.
Thanks, Amita. Happy Wednesday, folks. I'm, as always, excited for our conversation. I've been thinking a lot about space and place and belonging and writing about it for the last couple of years. Writing about it in the context of having been born in the city of Detroit, America's largest Black city that still feels like home, even though I've spent the majority of my time in Washtenaw, talking about space and place and belonging and healing and respite as a podcaster with fellow new colleague, Will Jones. We started a podcast called Black Dandelion, really to uplift a desire to connect to home here in Washtenaw County through Black culture and Black arts. Shout out to Wakanda Forever, which we just enjoyed watching with a beautiful group of people on Friday. And grappling with myself, my orientation to space and place and healing, as new CEO, and as the, Hamida, when you mentioned our own kind of grappling with our own complicity of occupying lands, the fact that the new center itself really was constructed as part of an effort to quote unquote revive that part of Ann Arbor. And so part of what I've been grappling with is our complicity in the gentrification of the old neighborhood and old west side of Ann Arbor. Obviously the land itself, which was toxified by the junkyard that was on it previously. So the earth is unhealed, and the building itself sits on land, as you mentioned, that belongs to our Native and Indigenous brothers and sisters. It's also adjacent to a neighborhood that had been historically Black. So I'm coming into the space today with kind of the tension of what is home, and what does it mean to be healing both ourselves, the lands, and our histories with home and with settler occupation and colonization. And I had the delight of presenting to a group of students at the Taubman College at U of M, a session that I titled Unbuilding Racism. And I just want to share, if I can, just 3 quick slides that I hope will help ground us in this conversation. And before I welcome my good friend, Susan. So part of what I was telling these architectural students and the folks who were there was this kind of tale of 2 cities. My roots in Detroit, Detroit's history of self-determination and Black power building. And by that, I mean cultural, political, economic power that is really devastated in the late 50s and early 60s, when a freeway 375 is built through what was then known as Black Bottom. And for those who are more local and more proximate, we have a similar story in Ann Arbor on Ann Street. That block had been a hub of Black-owned businesses in downtown Ann Arbor that's been virtually erased. And so I'm holding this question of how do we unlock potential and possibility needed to radically transform communities? How do we reconcile our orientation to space? And how do we move towards healing? And 2 people who are really inspiring my thinking. On the right is Deanna Van Buren, who I hired to help lead our efforts to hear from community about what they wanted the new center to be. Remy, my dog, likes her too. And I love this quote: "Nobody yet knows what the architecture of liberation will look like. Black and brown communities are speaking out, and we have to recognize that they are the only experts that can identify the goals for rebuilding and restoring communities. There has to be enduring and honest commitment at every level of government and everywhere else to move the resources." And she, as an architect, says that we, as architects, designers, planners, and developers, can help by supporting, I love this, the urgent, radical imagining and planning that must happen now to build a truly just future. And new to me, Toronto-based planner, designer, and thought leader, Jay Pitter, who I get to meet tonight, her quote really touched me too, that cities are becoming increasingly divided. Public spaces have the power to foster understanding, to inspire meaningful community participation and ownership, and then to instill joy. Pitter says that every park, every market, every street, and every alleyway is a litmus test for belonging. So as we're thinking about today, the spaces where we heal, I'm brought to our brother Malcolm X, who talks about revolution being based on land, and land as the basis of all of our independence, and land as the basis of freedom and justice and equality. And I will, as we move to Susan, just say that aside from Detroit, which has its own complicated history, present and future, Idlewild, which I'd grown up on as a kid, I revisited in the last several years. And it had been, and it continues to be, a place of returning, of home, a place to take off the mask and the layers and the othering, and to settle in with nature, with other people, with its history of power building, and with its complicated present and future. And Susan has been a steward and a guide for me, particularly in learning the history, so that I'm not just an interloper, or not just, showing up to partake and extract the splendor of Idlewild, but to really understand what it means in the cultural history of this state and the country. And so when we were thinking about what it means to be in space and where do we go to heal, I couldn't imagine a better person than Susan to be with us. Hey, sis.
Hi, Yodi. You really make me feel good. Let me tell you, I really do appreciate everything that you've shared. And it's an honor to work with you. I'm so pleased that we've been able to become friends through all the work that we've been doing.
Well, tell the people a little bit more about you. We always invite our guests to bring their full selves, like the identities and communities that you're bringing into the space. So would love for you to take some time and do that.
Thanks. So I am a transplant here to the community of Idlewild, and I think that's important to recognize. Though I have learned a lot, I am not an expert on Idlewild, and I'm always learning and growing in this space and place. Can I just take time? I really need to start, because I'll forget, to thank you both for inviting me to share my story, because I'm super honored to be included in this conversation. And I appreciate Yodit stretching me out of my comfort zone, because this is my first time doing this, and I'm really excited that I'm able to do it with amazing women like yourself. And then to kind of go to, I want to be intentional also to that, I got to recognize that there are many that people have come before me on this path. That, from the First Nations people of this land, from those who built the community of Idlewild, and that I now am privileged to call home, the ancestors and the residents that have carried on and protected this sacred space, and my own family and friends and ancestors that shaped who I am, and of course the creator of this beautiful life that I'm living. A little bit about me: I too was born and raised in the city of Detroit. My parents, I come from a bi-ethnic family background. My dad was from Detroit. His ethnic background is Czech. His family's from the Czech Republic. I think he's second generation in the, maybe second or third in the United States. My mother is first generation in the United States. She is from the island of Saipan, which is next to Guam. And so the people of that community, of my mother's community, are Chamorro. So I'm Chamorro and Czech, but I was raised in the city of Detroit. So that's my home. I will represent Detroit from now until forever. But I am also now blessed to represent the community of Idlewild. In 2020, when the world went upside down, my partner Blair and I decided to make this our full-time home. Prior to that, I started coming to Idlewild in the beginning of 2007. So it was our vacation, it was our refuge. His family has been coming here for over 100 years. His grandparents started visiting here, and then parents and uncles, and our mother and aunts and uncles built space homes here, and he's been a part of Idlewild for a long time. Most of the time it was just vacationing, and he lived here for a little bit, but when he brought me here, I fell in love with the place. I realized that it was a very special and unique place. I didn't know about Idlewild until I got here. like some of the folks in my generation, you know, Idlewild was a movie. Of course, when you get here, you learn that, you know, other than the name and like the music, it's not a real representation of the breadth of Idlewild. Let's see, what else would you like me to say? Is there anything else that I can share?
Just I mean, I think that I find it interesting. One of the things I love about you is that before you became this beautiful steward of Idlewild, you were a teacher. And I think that's an important identity, at least for me, that I experienced. Yeah, talk about that a little bit more.
So I am a teacher, even though I'm technically not in the classroom. I think once you are an educator and really live and thrive and find meaning in that work, you're always a teacher. I do miss working with the youth. I hope that some of the work we're doing here will provide the opportunity for do that again. But I worked in the Detroit area, started working at St. Benedict's in Highland Park, and then worked, that's where I met my partner. He, through our, the school that I worked with was a strict discipline academy. Though we did not do strict discipline, we were more of a therapeutic based, but our children, our children that came to us were usually those who this education system had failed them. They were dealing with a lot of challenges in their homes and environments. And so we were trying to figure out ways to help them engage in education in a way that was meaningful for them, because to that point, it was not working for them. My partner Blair, who was educated at MIT, had learned about a program called the Fab Lab that they started probably like 20 years ago now. Don't get me wrong. I mean, don't quote me on that, but it's been a while now. It's kind of like my version of the explanation is that it's like a makerspace on steroids, where you can just make anything. So we were trying to use those hands-on real world experiences to help them make the connection to why education was important. I had to learn a lot about the psychology and the traumas of the experiences our youth were dealing with. And I learned a lot about the way I learn and the way I was dealing with stuff. And I feel like that was super significant for me, because now instead of just looking at people and places about, and identifying the, the checklist of it's this or it's that, well, you got to ask why are things like that? And you come from much more place of empathy. And I think that's what I try to do in the work here, because I do recognize that living here in Idlewild is a privilege to be able to be a steward of the work here. Because I'm not a Black American, I also am very conscious of making sure that I'm respectful and aware. I'm not always perfect. I make mistakes too, but I try again to come from a place of empathy and respect and understanding when we do this work here. And
so
then,
go ahead.
No, I think I've also had the opportunity. My dad gave, I don't know if he did it I think he did it from a place of he just wanted to be able to provide his family with experiences and get to connect with our family. So a lot of my youth, we were able to travel to Saipan, where my mother's from. So, we went from the city of Detroit with a very specific cultural, growing up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, with that city life, culture experience, and then going all the way across the ocean, which I recognize now was a blessing, So I got to go to the village, a tiny island. So, and then we were able to go and travel to different parts of the United States, because a lot of my mom's family are in different places, from California to, Pennsylvania, that kind of thing. So I think those experiences, though I don't think he was intentional about it, gave me a lot of perspective on facets of looking at the world. And I feel like now that I'm older, I know I was code switching, like, but it was never uncomfortable for me. I just feel like it was like I just had different facets of myself that I was able to, activate or, and relate to people, really.
Yeah. No, I think that that last piece in particular, it doesn't fall light on me what a privilege it is to be able to travel and to get that perspective taking, right? To see people live in different ways. I'll never forget the first time I went to East Africa, to the home of my father's family and my grandmother. I probably have told this story before because it really changed things for me. Two things. One is so I grew up in a working class neighborhood in Detroit and not far from like the Brewster projects, which were at 96 and the Jeffries Freeway on the west side of Detroit. And so I understood poverty, but I also saw many versions of Blackness in Detroit and many different class identities, right?
Oh yeah.
But I hadn't, and at that time, Detroit was somewhat diverse, which is to say my neighborhood had different ethnic representations. I think that's changed quite a bit in terms of geography in the city now. But I remember going to visit my grandmother, it wasn't until in the 2000s, and seeing what I would interpret as poverty on such a larger scale and so deep. And I would even go so far as to say my grandmother was living in poverty, but I saw joy. I saw joy in a way that disrupted a mental model I had associated with place and what place looks like and how people are experiencing and interacting with place that I hear kind of coming through in some of how you talk about your travels. The other thing that happened for me when I was in Ethiopia, when I got back and people would ask me about the trip, I was like, our story does not begin with pain. And so when we talk about place, I just want to orient that there are so many people who never travel outside of the place that they were born in or the place they were raised in. And I even say that myself, that I've only ever lived in Michigan. I've traveled to many places, but I've never lived in Michigan. And what a loss it is when we think about healing, respite, community relationship, what a loss that is. And so you transplanted to Idlewild. Tell us about Idlewild. Like, I think people, I presume everybody. Oh, by the way, shout out, I got my Idlewild shirt.
Ah!
Hey.
Shop Idlewild,
But tell us just a little, like, tell us about Idlewild. This is the place you call home now. Tell us about it.
Yeah. So I wrote a piece a while ago as a reflection. I love a great analogy. Some of the work and training that we've done is in permaculture and sustainable practices of growing and food, which, coincidentally apply to people. So can I share that piece? And then from there?
Please. And Carly,
Okay.
would you unpin Hamida and I so the audience can fully see Susan?
Okay. Idlewild has long been known as Black Eden. Black Eden is a garden, a sacred space where generations of Black Americans have come to as a place of refuge to rest, reconnect to history, culture, nature, and the Idlewild community. Some observers only see fallow ground, but those with wise eyes and deep appreciation and understanding of how time and systemic forces have slowed community growth look deeper and see the rich potential of new life awaiting under the soil. This potential is usually only seen by those who are willing to dig in and get their hands dirty in the soils of possibility. Today, many Idlewilders serve knowingly or unknowingly as caretakers. Many are a part of a long line of Idlewild stewards protecting and preserving the cultural and historical authenticity of this sacred space. We quietly tend the fertile soil of this sacred garden so that all that understand the significance of Idlewild are able to plant the seeds of their dreams and ideas. As these dreams and ideas take root, the diversity in the garden attracts and supports abundance of a growing community. Many areas of the garden have lain dormant, yet are fertile and ready for the seeds of ideas to grow and flourish. Some caretakers are quietly tending their part of the Black Eden with the resources and knowledge available to them, while other caretakers are quietly working with others to support and nurture their blooming projects and businesses. Collectively, these efforts will once again create a Black Eden teeming with new growth, diverse and sustainable businesses, cooperative and vibrant relationships, and a happy and healthy community. Much of this work goes unseen by passersby of our garden. Though Black Eden serves as a sanctuary, this is not paradise. This garden requires fervent care and attention. This garden is not secure from noxious weeds and pests. These invaders can be rooted out with the collective effort of our community's love, care, and attention to tend and protect the garden. Entrepreneurs will plant seeds, families will grow roots, neighbors will form guilds of mutually supportive bonds. These regenerating efforts of investment in time, talent, energy, and dedication will be such that Idlewild Black Eden will once again be a thriving, healthy, vibrant community for many generations to come.
I don't know about others, but I'm over here snapping.
Thank you.
I feel so excited. I'm sorry. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm looking so forward to May. I don't know what to do with myself right now. I'm like,
we need to mute someone.
I'm sorry, my husband listening in too. So
thank you for that. Thank you. Is that you, Najma? Yeah. Thanks, sweetie.
So, you know, Idlewild is a complex place. It's one of several different communities, Black communities that were created during segregation as a place of the only safe places where Black people could travel and own property and eat and enter buildings, you know, like a human being. So it was, you know, listed in the Green Book. And
what's the Green Book, Susan?
The Green Book is the guide that was created for Black Americans to know when they were traveling across the country where they could stop safely and not be in fear of being killed if, you know, while they were traveling.
And do I remember correctly that, is it 4 Jewish brothers bought this land and resold
it? I can't remember they're Jewish, but there were 4 white men who purchased the land originally. And they decided that they saw a need for a place for Black Americans because there was a rising middle class, and I believe, you know, they knew there were people who had money and needed a place to go. And so they recruited some folks out of Chicago and a couple other places to invite other Black people to come and visit it. And so once they helped establish the folks that were coming here to sell this, to sell the land and take over the land, they kind of exited and left it to Black folks to create the space that they needed. And
that was 115
so
years ago?
1912 was when they bought it, and then I think like 1912 to 1915 was when it was established and started.
I just think that's so, you know, that one of the things we talk a lot about here in Centering Justice is co-liberation, and what is the role of each of us in dismantling systems of oppression, right? And we have a multiracial group that participates in Centering Justice, and not that, you know, they weren't opportunists or they weren't acquiring land or they weren't settling land or colonizing land for that matter, but I think it's like that felt resonant for me when I learned that history. Tell us more about Idlewild.
So Idlewild was established as a vacation place in rural northern Michigan. It got its reputation for entertainment and music for quite a few decades, though that was not the main purpose it was founded on. And then when the Civil Rights Act was passed, it gave folks the opportunity to go on vacation where they weren't allowed to in the past. And so they took advantage of that. They wanted to go and see what else was out there. And unfortunately, it wasn't just Idlewild that has happened to. It happened to communities like in Detroit or, you know, other vacation places, that when folks left to go check out other places, they took their time, their talent, their money, their resources. And so some people will often refer to Idlewild as an abandoned community. It is never abandoned. It is very important to remember that there have been families here for 6 and 7 generations that did not leave, who have their homes, and they stuck around when times were hard. And Idlewild is a unique place because we have a lot of land for a Black community. It's in the rural North. I think that kind of helped keep it intact and majority Black ownership, because, you know, it's cold here and there's not a lot of business here to attract people to kind of take it over. So, but that doesn't mean that folks aren't trying to, you know, won't take advantage of a community if the opportunity presents it to themselves. So I think in the last several years, there's been a reawakening or rejoining of the community to have your events here, move here full time. There's a lot of friends, our mutual friend who introduced us, Michelle Watts and Tony Watts, they came here for a Summer Oasis Music Festival that our friend our now friend Cedric McDougal brought up from Detroit. And it's a summer glamping festival. But when they were introduced through that festival, they were like, oh, we want the Watts family and others were like, oh, this is a place that we feel that we could, one, really feel comfortable here and would like to put down roots to continue the analogy.
Can I talk about that a little bit? Because I was with them that weekend.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Them coming up from Oakland County, me coming from Washtenaw County, we had created a dinner club where a group of us couples would meet and make food together. And, you know, we had a Harlem Renaissance night where we dressed up, and that weekend, that glamping weekend, was an opportunity for us to pack up our cars and compete for the best tent presentation at glamping. And many of us had never spent that time like in a tent, away from home, on the ground, in unfamiliar territory. And we were so excited to drive up with the promise of this elaborate glamping festival. And I think I can speak for all of us that from the moment you drive up that 2-lane highway and turn into Idlewild, with streets named after our ancestors and elders, with remnants of its history, but also stories of families, as you say, for generations who made Idlewild home. I know that for each of us to look around that weekend where there were torrential rains, it actually, the whole concert was rained out, but we would not move. And we stayed, we were soaking wet, everything that we had thought of. But to look out among that group, which for me was an exception, to be in a space that was almost exclusively Black, that was in nature, not in a city, that overlooked a beautiful lake, and that was surrounded by homes owned and community centers and the museum that's there, that had this history that kind of rose up to say, welcome home. And yes, there were rustic parts, and there were parts of it where you could see the migration that had happened post Civil Rights Act. But there was also a familiarity and a kinship And I think all of us felt this kind of regulation of our nervous systems, not just in our racial identities, but also this place of escaping hyperproductivity and grind culture and all of that. And we slowed down to the rhythms and the beats of the music. And we went into the, juke joint, the crushed velvet seats and the wooden bars and all of it. It made me feel something that I'd only felt on Pembroke and Glastonbury on the west side of Detroit, and upon arrival to Ethiopia. It is indeed a Black Eden.
I mean, you have a return to nature. You have a return to a community where folks get to see themselves in all shades and backgrounds, and everybody gets to slow down. I think a lot of us have forgotten that it just took one generation for us to get disconnected from what village and community means. I mean, all the fancy stuff that happens now, like when I was growing up, we would meet our friends, meet up with them and just hang out for the day. We didn't do anything except just hang out with each other. And so I think that just speaks to what is still in our DNA, and what we know is the need that I think that's part of why society is suffering right now, because we are so disconnected from each other. And then this place is a special place historically and culturally. But when you get down to it, it's just people in nature connecting with other human beings on a very regular, like normal way of life. Yeah.
So Susan, I feel, both you and Yodit have touched on this, but we're holding space for spaces where we heal, right? And healing can contain many things: connectedness, relationships. I heard you talk about like comfort. In the chat, I saw folks talk about like their sofa or lakes or mountains or their backyard or people. I'm just really curious, as you talked about your connection to Idlewild, as you've gone on your healing journey, Susan, what are some things that were particularly highlights or clear to you that were healing in your journeys along to Idlewild or other places where you really felt that ability to revive and regenerate? And I feel like you've already touched on some of that. But I'm curious because I feel like love also plays a role in that. And I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so let me be fully transparent. This work is not easy. It takes a lot of grit and grace to show up and do this every day. But I'm blessed to have a partner that we both feel that this kind of work and the communities like this are important. So it does take a lot of intentional time to reconnect and check in with yourself. For me, these days, healing, just like some of the other folks, home is definitely, because I have wandered for all of my adult life. I've lived in lots of different places just within the city of Michigan and lived in New York. But I feel like all of that was me collecting my life experiences so that when I did want to put down roots in one place, and Idlewild, it happens to be that place, I can value this so much more. It means so much more. So when I'm rooting and nesting and creating this home that, will be healing for both of us as we continue to do this work, that's important. Connection to community members when you're stressed out and when things are hard, and you're getting pushback from people who may not understand the bigger picture or might be confused about your intentions because they don't really know you. You've got to connect to the people that love and care about you the most. There are several people in Idlewild that we have taken us under their wing, from my Idlewild godmothers to Denise and Freddie, who saw us as people that they could work with and help us help the community of Idlewild, to, you know, Miss Betty Foote, who was born and raised here and is just, she's a leader in the community. And I know when things get challenging, I can go and talk to them. And because they know me, that helps me push through. You know, I'm lucky to have the lake and the forest. So, you know, I've started this new thing where I just read a prayer, a Taoist prayer, like has to do with using the morning as a blessing, as a prayer, as a celebration of, you know, a new day and all of those things. So, you know, or even just taking your tea and sitting down. So I feel like, I thought about this the other day, really just kind of going back to the simple things, focusing on those things and finding joy in that, and the traditions and the connections to community and family, really what sustains me.
Thank you so much, Susan. You say traditions, and I think about how in some ways you're creating new traditions, and Blair, your partner who you mentioned, there might be some return to tradition there. And in making that shift to, you'd been in Idlewild and connected with Idlewild for a while, but you made that shift. And you mentioned nesting. It makes me curious, like, what is nesting to you? What does it mean in terms of that, like, healing, restorative space?
Yeah, you know, for some friends of mine, I was telling them where I am in life right now and just trying to create a comfortable healing place at home. And they were the ones who were like, oh, you're nesting. I was like, oh, okay. So that just means, you know, creating a space that I feel joy. And it's a place that even, because, well, so Idlewild was in the beginning our place of refuge. You know, we had the city life and the businesses and the work that we were doing down there. So this was our escape. And then when you move here, it's still a place of refuge and relaxation. However, it is now our focus of our work too. So just having a space within our community of Idlewild that, you know, we can go and recharge our batteries and fill up our love tanks, you know, and connect with have our family and friends over. That's what that's about, I guess.
No, that's beautiful, Susan. I think what I hear is a real recognition of a place that drew you, that Idlewild was a place that you felt connection and resonance. And I mean, this is my editorializing, but in a way, you shifted priorities to thinking about what it really means to feel that connection and observe that you loved where you lived and you felt drawn to move and lean more into that connection. And I love that notion of a love tank. Can you talk a tiny bit more about
So Love Tank is, that wasn't my thing. That was out of the 5 love languages. I can't remember the author. And it spoke to the fact that each one of us has a love tank. And some of our love tanks are more full than others. And I think that's something that we have to remember, to always make sure we are doing the things that fill the love tank up. Because with all of the work that we're all doing, a lot of us are givers. A lot of us sacrifice our own family and free time to do the work that we're doing. So it's just super important to take that time as we're focusing on here, healing and filling the love tank with whatever gives you joy. And one of the things that when we were doing this work with the youth and talking about the love tank, we also had to remember, I brought it up, it was like, okay, so not only do we have love tanks, but some of us have leaking love tanks. So that means we've got some traumas and some life experiences that did damage to our love tanks. And even though you know, you're trying to put the stuff in there, you know, it's just leaking right out. So you got to also be conscious of fixing that. So, you know, paying attention to that in your own life, but then also recognize that in the people that you're working with, because you're like, oh, that gives you more context and empathy again, right? And seeing people, that's something that my mom always helped me with. I mentioned my dad earlier, but my mom too, she sacrificed a lot to be able to give us the opportunities to our education and travel and that kind of thing. But she always taught me to see people from just, as you know, when we were growing up, it was silly to me, it was kind of annoying. And she would always ask people their names wherever we went, you know? So I think that empathy I get from my mom. She just planted those seeds, that from small things to, you know, just recognizing people, calling them by their names, taking the time to introduce herself. And then she just is a giver too. So I kind of, that's where I get that from.
I so appreciate like the depth and the multiple layers of not just locating ourselves in macro space, Idlewild, but then the microcosm of that your home represents for a space to find joy, to fill that love tank, to and I think it's interesting, you know, we've been home, like literally forced home by the pandemic, right? To not only stay safe ourselves, but to keep others safe. And a big arc of this chapter of Centering Justice that's been about healing and the journey really of healing, because it's not a destination, has also been about remembering, which you spoke of for a little bit, you know, the remembering our ways of being that are interrupted by colonialism, interrupted by capitalism, interrupted by industrialism, interrupted by, you know, adverse impacts, these bigger systems too, right? And I think, you know, Audre Lorde says the personal is political. And so the invitation around where do we heal is really around where are the places we go to remember and to reconnect. And I want to ask you about other places besides Idlewild, because what we hope is that today we're inviting people to think about beyond, you know, home, where we've been for the last 2.5 years, how to make those reconnections. But before, you know, I'll give you a minute to think about like where are other places, and really more importantly, why? I'm curious, like sociologically, why, and psychologically, why do we go to these places? But in September, we invited people to think about who helps you heal. And I see that resonance, you know, you and the connection with your partner, but also the connection with the elders in Idlewild and the connection with the history and the ancestors of Idlewild, right? And then last month we were talking about what does healing look like in practice? Because so many of us have been enticed to these systems that are unhealed and that harm us in some ways, whether that's hyperproductivity or work environments or behaviors and practices that that are antithetical to, you know, to us thriving or flourishing, which is really what I long for everybody, right? That you have an opportunity in this temporal experience of life, right, to be whole and to be filled by the love that you talk about, but also the connection, and that we have what somebody, I was in a webinar last week called radical empathy, which is more than just like, I appreciate that, you know, the circumstance that you're experiencing, but that radical empathy moves us to acting and behaving differently. For me, that looks like preserving cities and spaces and histories and presence, right? That's an active, radical, active empathy, is to ensure that the places where we heal are not further colonized or gentrified or occupied without a regard for that history. So we've been thinking, you know, I think place is complicated. It's really complicated, and where we go to heal is really complicated. For the first time, I think for me, I have wanderlust. I love to travel. And I was sharing when we talked about who we heal with in September, my trip to Costa Rica. And I won't repeat that, but it was one of the first times that I really paused, Susan, and you helped me to do this when we invite our leaders of color to Idlewild, to pause to think about what is the story of this place that offers me healing today, right? That offers me respite today, that offers me home today. The Ann Street project that I showed in Ann Arbor, I'm helping to advise on a mixed use development that's being built there. And people have a view of Ann Arbor and of Washtenaw County that is very different, in fact, than the history of many of our residents that they have and the present experience that they're having. And so we've been talking about what does it mean to both find healing for ourselves, but contribute to repair and healing for others, right? And so I'm curious about, for me, the Costa Rica trip was like a reminder to pause and to understand, you know, beyond just the ocean side view that I loved and, you know, the beautiful weather that I experienced and even the connection with my family and friends there, but to pay homage to the Mesoamerican history of that land and the Spanish colonization of that land and the further decimation of that land and the new, like what new people in those lands created. So beyond Idlewild, are there, you mentioned your mother's homeland and you mentioned your dad's homeland of Czech, and you mentioned a lot of travels, but are there places now besides home and Idlewild where you find healing and restoration and where you feel deep connection to those histories?
So I think I'm at a stage in my life where, because, and not to mention the fact that not just maturity, but also because I've had those life experiences of traveling to different parts of the United States and working in different communities from, you know, suburban to rural to, you know, I went to Catholic school, but I worked in the public school system. So, you know, I've traveled to the villages, but I've, you know, lived in the city. So I was also, through some of the work we did with our youth, we got to go to South Africa and Ethiopia too. So having all of those experiences, when it comes down to it, I feel like the hardest work is just really getting to know yourself, like checking in with yourself on when do you feel the most joy? What are you doing that you would, you know, do if nobody, you know, if pay wasn't a thing, you know? So like, so it's not, I feel like wherever you go, if you can check in with yourself and figure out what are the things that you're working on, because I thought, like you said, it's always a journey, right? And then the things that motivate you, and you can find those things wherever you go. I don't know if that's cliche, but I don't know, I'm a Sagittarius, so I think you know, and I think like Wanda said, my people were wanderers. So I am comfortable traveling and visiting different places, but I'm also okay with being quiet and connecting with people that I love, wherever that is. If it's at a kitchen table, you know, or my girlfriend's house drinking wine, or with my family at Christmas. So just, I think it's just really identifying what are those things.
So Susan, I was precisely going to ask you that. I think last month when we were talking about practicing healing, I was really struck by, and Julie Quiros had joined us. There was this real embodied piece to the work that personally for me, some of it was familiar and some of it was like, wow, we're just going to learn this in real time on camera in front of other people. And that's fine too. But I think as humans, we can be pretty adaptable and I'll drop an I statements here in terms of being in a place or space that may not have initially felt like it was for me or that I belonged, but sort of adapting and finding my own way, my own people, my own way to sort of like be in the space. So there's that piece that sometimes we can just acclimate and adjust and think it's just fine. But I guess for me, sometimes I wonder, is it just really fun? And so when you've talked about so many of the places that you've traveled and lived and connected with people, kind of along the question that Yodit had asked, in some ways, how do you know that it's it? How do you know that a space is healing for you? And in some ways, in addition to knowing that a space is healing for you, how does it feel in your body to know that? Like, what does that knowing in your body look like or feel like?
That's a good one. So I have done try to conscious work on recognizing when a place or people are not good for me. So paying attention to those cues, from the feeling in your stomach to the blood pressure. So definitely paying attention to those cues so that I can either one, avoid that, or try to activate my mantras or my deep breathing when I'm in those situations. And then when I am in those places where I am feeling joy and feeling good about the people in the place, I'm more conscious about it, I guess, of just making note of those things now. What does it feel like? It feels like home, right, Jody?
It's interesting that you brought up the permaculture, and I'm not sure how many folks are familiar with it, or even if you want to talk about it, but you reminded me of like the 12 principles of permaculture, and they very much relate to this topic, this idea of like observe and interact, with ourselves and with the space, catch and store energy. Again, I felt that coming through. Obtain a yield, right? Like your hard work pays off. Apply self-regulation and give feedback, right? Use and value renewable resources. Produce no waste. Design from patterns to details, which makes me think about mycelial networks and the work of Adrienne Marie Brown, right? And how and murmuration, right? Integrate rather than segregate, which seems so relevant as we think about this nation's history of place and even Idlewild's history. Using small and slow solutions, right? That slowing down that you mentioned, to listen, to notice, to fill the love tank, use and value diversity. In other words, in the permaculture context, growing a diversity of plants means there's always something beneficial for the insects and the gardens, and but I think we can apply that to place, use the edges and value the marginal, right? In permaculture, they're talking about the edge of the driveway or the balcony or the footpath, but like also how do we use the edges of space and the value, the margins within it. And then finally, like using creatively and responding to change, I think are such important elements for thinking about, place and healing and space, this interconnection between our personhood and where our feet are planted, right? Where our bodies are planted. There's a lot for us to gain from permaculture. And And I think I'd love for you to talk a little bit. I know this is not your work alone, but when we were good, good, Celeste, when you are involved in some efforts at Idlewild that are about building, you know, economic and cultural power within Idlewild and building an entrepreneurial ecosystem and opportunities for self-determination and for interconnected fabrics. And I think that that is also, for me at least, I'm asking you more as a question, but for me, I remember in 2020, again, I live in Ipsy like Hamida does, and there wasn't a place I could buy a Black Lives Matter shirt, like locally, right? There aren't spaces where I can walk into them and see cultural representations or representations of things that are important to me. And I think unintentionally that contributes to that sense of othering or not belonging. And so going back to some of the observations of things that I've seen y'all do, social events, you know, other community organizing. Idlewild has been a place for poets to come and artists and musicians, and just kind of curious about how you could, you know, not only like how has it been a place for healing for you, but how are you and others, again, not just you, but others, thinking about creating healing space for other folks that visit Idlewild?
So the permaculture principles are pretty much founded on our indigenous ancestral practices, and they follow the systems of nature. And so I think that goes back and then reemphasizes that reconnecting and learning to connect to nature and one another as a way of building, thriving, and sustaining, like emotionally sustaining lives, relationships, to have a joyful life as a way of healing. For me, I hate to keep just referring back, but I feel like we are as stewards tending to the garden, so that when folks are willing and able to come to the community, that one, they have an opportunity, so things are ready for them to plug into and grow their ideas and share their projects. For me, one of the things that I found over the last couple of years is I really enjoy connecting people to one another so that they can work and support one another. So for instance, when Summer Oasis Music Festival came, or Tawana Petty brought up Petty Propolis with her artist festival, because we were here on the ground and we got to understand the things that we had and the things we didn't have, we were able to, you know, support them and say, okay, well, this will work over here and you can try this over here, or maybe that might not work because, you know, we've been trying it different ways. I literally walk around it. You got to be careful when you meet me, because if you tell me what you like to do, I'm going to try to find a way for you to activate in this space and call you. And hopefully
that is
so for, I guess, one of my roles that I value and I hope I'm able to do well here is to help other people activate their passions and their talents and find a place here that helps them heal and thrive too. Yeah, there's a thing in permaculture, and I guess in growing, there's guilds, so like, you put your tree, and then you put the plants around it, and then you put the animals and all of the microorganisms, you try to put this guild together, so then it's a mutually beneficial relationship. And then I guess that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to build guilds with mutually beneficial relationships.
I'd love to invite folks who are with us into this conversation. Where are you kind of searching for space and healing for yourselves? Some folks talked about early on when we asked about where do you find respite and rest near water. Najma mentioned in Idlewild and the connection to Lake County, which I thought was so beautiful. And yes, to unplugging from technology, which I must say is not ever optional. Idlewild is just like, look, chick, your phone ain't gonna work. That is not to say I don't be trying to stand on my foot,
Well, to be fair, we've got broadband fiber going through now, and we've got some more coming in the next couple of years. So that might not be.
Don't tell us that, Susan. I think
Okay.
it's a beautiful respite from tech. When Yodi, I too was just like hanging out in one little square, because that's where I had like half a bar, but it was beautiful. And that helped propel me to a space of actually paying attention, being embodied, not using the distraction of news, which already plays on emotions and capitalism. But I don't want to reshift Yodi's question.
No, go ahead. I mean, Hamida, I want to, maybe you could kick off and then we can invite folks from the audience, because you were part of the first Champions for Change Fellowship, for folks who don't know, and our inaugural trip to Idlewild. And for me, we not only took you all on, a journey of Washtenaw County's racial history, but took y'all up to Idlewild to rest. And although Idlewild has this steeped history in, steeped Black history, obviously you are not Black, but I'd love to hear about your experience of being in that place, and kind of like where have been spaces for healing for you too. And maybe that would make room to open up, folks can have a minute to think about their, thoughts about spaces they heal and what that means to them after hearing from you, my love.
Thank you, dude. I so appreciate that. I feel like my story and understanding of healing with space is still unfolding like everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
I think about so my beginnings, I do think historically, my family and I are part of a triple diaspora, from India to Trinidad in the Caribbean, and then from Trinidad to New York. And then of my own volition, mostly, and some scholarship money, I came to Michigan. And I think about the ways in which my relationship to place and space has shifted. And so, Susan, I had an agenda. I mean, obviously, with that question I asked, in terms of sometimes we can make a space work and it's decent, but what does it mean to find place or space that is more than that, that really feels like just firmly sitting in this is it for me, this is where I belong. So I will say that I realized, and home is such, I love how I probably made a face when both of you are talking about home, because that's something that's very conflicting to me, or for me, because of a lot of movement, because of history, because of religious conflict within my context. And I will say, within my own journey of finding place and space, what is, and Yodit and I talked a little bit about this, kind of in my own journey when we debrief after the debrief, is people-centered. And so I think about the importance of relationships for me. And I also hold that my history's relationships can be fraught as well with conflict, and what it means to ground to a space and place and connect to people in ways that might be real familiar, to connect with people who share identities with me, but often people who don't share identities with me. I think I've met two other Trini women in the 19 years I've been in Michigan. And I think about how for some folks that can be, I do a lot of explaining or sharing my story, which I'm down for. But also I think about the ways in which I'm also adding to my sense of belonging. Like EOD, as you were sharing, I jokingly talk about, I buy a lot of stuff from New York, where I grew up, because there is some Caribbean community, but not many Indo-Caribbean folks that I found here. And I think about the ways in which I can contribute to that space for future folks who hold similar backgrounds. And I think about often like my responsibility if I'm longing for something. I don't think I'm that unique and that no one else ever is longing for that as well. And also think about, given my own capacities, what can I do to help bring that about? And so I think my relationship to space, as almost everyone else's, is complex. I will say going to Idlewild, it was a beautiful space just because I live in Ipsy. There are lots of green places, but it was legit helpful. I could not use my cell phone. And I really, like, one of my most distinct memories is being able to sit in the woods and journal and write my thoughts and reflect in a way that was unencumbered from like other outside noise, both like literal noise, but also other messaging or expectations from folks. So I will say Idlewild was extremely grounding. And it was very important for me to hold that that there's a rich history of Idlewild that it is important for me to know. I think somewhere down the line, I feel like we're all family and we're all connected. So I'm like, my skin suit might not reflect like specific tie, but I'm sure somewhere down the line there's some ancestor that I'm related to. So yes, it's a space that, as a non-Black POC, I hold in honor that there is a rich, deep history, American history, as well as a Black American history. It's not only just Black American history, that I can still connect to and plug into, and I feel is important to honor. And sort of holding the multiplicity of my own histories, or I guess what I perceive to be my own histories, given the data I have. And the real heritage and energy of a space. Also, I am a little new age woo-woo, and Idlewild, like when I asked about that embodied piece, like that was something that stuck out for me. Like I just felt such good energy. And to answer my own question about how to know that was it, I just felt that real connection. Like I felt like Hamida's voice was louder, and the people I had the joy and honor to be with, like their voices were louder too.
Mm,
It's just so much.
that was a word. And yeah, I appreciate you bringing us back to our bodies too, right? And the 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 thematic affirmations that we can get in space as well, and recognizing that it's complicated for all of us. And one of the things I love about collaborating with you and a lot of the deep conversations we have are reckoning with our own complicity in colonialism, our own the migratory patterns of our families, some forced, some through escape, some because of the empire, right? So it is by no means our, and I think Susan invited us to this with the nuance of Idlewild, like it is complicated. Any space on these lands is going to be inherently complicated. So I'm just kind of curious what resonated with folks from today's topic, and also like what's getting activated for you in terms of searching for space and healing, or maybe even broader. And we would invite you, since it's an intimate group, to come off of mute if you would like, but just keep your comments to a couple of minutes. Share the mic with others.
So what I'm not hearing, or what I'm maybe observing, is that no one was moved today or didn't bring anything up.
Lies, lies, lies.
Hi, friends. I will contribute. I like to kind of defer to all of the BIPOC people in the group, but since nobody else is speaking up, I will just say that Susan, when I heard you say check, that really resonated with me. And one of my fondest memories is actually visiting Ellis Island and seeing my great grandpa's name on the wall, who immigrated from Czechoslovakia in 1901. And so that to me felt like a really sacred space. And I still have a picture of my great grandpa's name on the wall. And as a kid, I got to be near him. He grew up in my household, but I don't remember a lot about him. I remember that he had a really strong Czech accent and I had a hard time understanding him. But it just is a really fond memory for me. So that to me is a sacred space.
Thank you for that, Celeste. And thanks for your deference to BIPOC folks, who we also welcome your voices and your rememberings of places where you heal. If not, I always have words, but we're gonna be quiet for a second.
Sometimes there is processing and meaning making in quiet too.
I just wanted to enter into this space and just say that coming to these sessions is always like a safe space for me, because I get to hear how so many people are connected to their ancestors and connected to the people before them and knowing where they came from. It used to be very sad and discouraging because I don't have that history. So I would just allow my children to listen in and share with them like how important it is to know who we are and where we come from. It means so much to me. And so I'm just on a journey, instead of feeling sad about it, I try to share with them as much as I do know. And then I'm just trying to dig even deeper, because I just think it would bring, I don't know if it's going to bring me more peace. I don't know, but I long to know who I really am and where I really came from. And I just want to tell everybody, thank you for always, and for creating this space to where, every time I log on, someone is knowing who they are and where they've come from. And I'm like, oh, that's so amazing. It brings so much security into, I think, an individual and what kind of, inheritance I want to leave for my children. And so just thank everybody for sharing, and creating this space. And so one day I'm gonna have something.
You know what though, Najma, that I so appreciate you naming that, because with, the level of violence, extraction, human trafficking of Black bodies into this country, there are a lot of lost histories. And I think even the internalization of supremacy caused some of us to deny our ancestry beyond these lands. And I'm glad to know that more of us are actively seeking out and learning complicated histories. If you use ancestry.com or africanancestry.com, that colonizer is still up in that report, right? Which is, it re-traumatizes many Black and African people. And so what I think I hear you saying is that, we have a right to know. Each of us, regardless of these constructed identities, we each have the right to know where is home, right? Where do I belong? Whether that's a continent or a country or a state, or let us name our ancestors who are lost in the waters, right? Who did not have an opportunity to stay home, right? So thank you for, even though you didn't specifically name it, I feel responsible to name that for some of us on here, this conversation is hard to have because of that disassociation from home, and that we have a right to know. And I love that you are finding your way to home and to ancestry for your children, because I really do believe that that is a radical and loving act. Asandi, I saw you come on the video. Hi and welcome.
May I steal like 30 seconds and then share, Asani? Thank you for your patience with me. What you shared, Yogi, I think about the ways in which there are multiple diasporas, both of folks' volitions and not. I think about, so my ancestors from India were indentured servants / slaves because the contract terms changed mid-boat, transferring, transport, whatever we want to call it. And I think about the ways in which that can be complicated. And as you were talking, I was really struck because I think the new team knows I needed to take a DNA test last year because I was like, I really don't know. I want to know. And I think about in some ways how affirming it was to get that story. And then after that, I was like, I'm unsure what the DNA test actually proved, other than what 23andMe thinks my blood ancestry was. So I think about how it's sort of a both and. It's understanding our story. And also I think it's how we make meaning of that story. And I'll drop to I statements, like how making meaning of what my histories were and are. What are the stories I heard from my family of persistence? And what are some of the history book articles that I can go back and read too?
Right on. Thank you for that. Asandi?
I do not have a response to your question, Yodi, but
Okay.
listening just affirms this pull that I have felt to Idlewild for decades, and I have yet to go. So it has been a bucket list destination for me. So what I heard of this conversation just affirms that I need to prioritize that for next year. So I just wanted to say that, like, that was one of the reasons I wanted to hear. And so it just affirms I need to get my ass there. So I will do that next year.
Please.
I second that. Get your butt there and make sure you connect with Susan, who is just delightful. And we're so glad, Susan, that you were with us, that you took this first step to a platform to talk about your great work with us. I hope it was a nourishing experience in spite of the nerves.
Thank you so very much. To do this with you in this space, I couldn't have asked for a better first experience. So thank you so much.
Yeah, we love you. And the fellows will be there to see you this spring under Hamida's leadership. I ain't never even heard that the DNA test failed. Y'all gonna have to start a whole side chat conversation. That just blew my mind. I'm like, what?
I didn't study enough, y'all. No,
of course it did. Of course it did. Of course, because it is an apparatus. But listen, we love to co-create centering justice with our audience, and we'll be working on our upcoming season, which, Carly, next session, can you?
Yeah, December 10th is our next, or December 7th, 12 to 1:30 is our next one. And we'll include the link so you can go ahead and register for that now if you want.
Get registered, help us expand this community. I got like a little birdie told me that some regional and national folks have eyes on us, y'all. So help us get the word out about CJ. And please, as always, use the survey to give us your feedback on this session so we can continue to shape the trajectory of the webcast with you, not for you. Anything else, Carly, for the good of the cause?
I think that's it, Yodi. Thanks.
I'm gonna ask you as a parting exercise. Sometimes we play music. Carly, I do want you to continue Stephanie Mills's song if you would, but I want you to maybe take a moment, today to just get your feet planted in what feels like home for you, to reflect on what it feels like for you, and how can we contribute to creating home for others? How can we take that and spread it through the networks? Take us out, DJ Carly. Y'all have a good day, good rest of the day and week, and stay warm. We'll see you next month.